Hey, it's Alex here. Before we get started, I wanted to tell you that this episode of the New Stack Makers is part of our second season of the Tech Founder Odyssey. We're so excited about this series that we're doing with tech founders. We're going to hear from more founders as they share how they've launched their venture, what they've learned from their successes, and how the pitfalls along the way have helped shape the way they run their company. I'm very interested in how they came up with this idea. What were the challenges? Those are the kind of things you're going to hear in these stories. We've got some great guests lined up, so please stay tuned. You're watching the New Stack Makers, a podcast for people who develop, deploy, and manage at-scale software. For more information and articles about at-scale technologies, please visit thenewstack.io. Now enjoy the show. Hey everyone, today I'm with Gene Yang, the co-founder of Akita Software that's now part of Postman. Gene, we've been trying to do this interview for a while. I'm really glad we were able to talk. I just did like a scary thing for Halloween because it's coming up. But are you going to dress up for Halloween? Do you usually dress up for Halloween? Do you have any kind of themes?
I tried to. This year, my costume isn't as epic as some previous years. One year, I was a tornado. So I made this whole tornado costume with IP addresses in it. I think that's still my best one to date.
That's amazing. Tornado. Most people out there will get that. So that's great. Yeah.
This year, my costume is still yet to be revealed. Well, really, I just don't want to talk about it because it's not as cool as my tornado costume. Nothing can live up to that.
Yeah, it's hard when you have a really great costume and then you have to think, what am I going to do now? But
sometimes you just peak in life.
Yeah, but you haven't peaked.
My Halloween life has
Your
peaked.
Halloween life has peaked. Yeah. I'm trying to make a comeback, but we'll get to that another time. So, Gene, you co-founded Akita. Tell me about those early days. Why did you, where were you when you said, let's start this company? I mean, there's this lore about San Francisco. I think that's where you are. Where it's yeah, I was just hanging out with a friend and, we're talking about it. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah. Or I was at a party and yeah, let's do it. What was it? Was it as abstract as that?
For me, it was really about what I wanted to be working on the next 5 years. And I ended up working on Akita almost exactly 5 years. Now I'm working at Postman, I guess, on the same thing. So I was thinking a lot about what I wanted to be working on the next 5 to 10 years. And I had been doing research in programming languages, which is actually not just about designing programming languages or anything like that. But the thing I was going after was, how do we help people build more reliable software systems? And so I have a view that, well, it's just the truth that software is running the world, that software is one of the biggest social problems no one is talking about. People talk about climate change. They talk about a bunch of other things, but the fact that our software isn't doing what we think it's doing, or there's no sense of this is what the software is supposed to do on many levels, that was always deeply upsetting to me. And so I was that really drove me to continue making tools to help people make their software more reliable. And so I did my PhD at MIT. I was a tenure track professor at Carnegie Mellon University, and that at the time and still is the best programming languages group in the world. And so we were doing a lot of work on software correctness. How do we analyze software systems to know that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing? And I kept on coming across an issue that I couldn't get over, which was whenever software makes calls across the network, we have no guarantees anymore. And so there's no type system that can save you. There's no analysis of the code that can save you. And this is happening more and more often with REST APIs. And so what was happening was the rise of APIs meant that as I saw it, all of the work I was doing and much of the work my colleagues were doing around software correctness, type systems, software analysis, it sort of went out the window to some extent because of REST APIs. And this had been troubling me well before I started Akita. I was just thinking about, man, every time you build a web app, you're doing these database calls, you're doing these API calls. Things aren't really nice and tidy anymore. And so I spent a few years before starting Akita figuring out what the heck to do to make sense of all of this. I had done a research project before starting Akita that was, enforcing security policies across REST APIs, and I started thinking a lot about REST APIs and how there's more of them every day, which is troubling, but they're all REST, which is comforting because REST is a pretty standard protocol, and you can do certain things to make sense of it. And so me thinking about Akita was very much born out of trying to make sense of what's the right way to make progress on software quality in the face of what I saw as a huge threat to software understandability and quality, which is APIs. APIs make it super easy to write more code quickly, but do you understand what that code does? Can you make that code work reliably? If your proton therapy machine or your election machine, or even the apps on your phone that any other country could hack at any time, was running based on a system full of REST APIs, do you feel comfortable? And my answer is kind of no. I don't. Akita actually started out as an API security company, and we moved into API observability from there because it turned out to be a better place for us to be. But I really started Akita as a solo founder. I trialed a couple of co-founders. There was no one who saw the problem the same way I did. I think that for, different manifestations of Akita, there would have been the right co-founder, but I was sort of like, I don't know what journey we're on at the moment. And so I wanted someone to be fundamentally aligned on some of the things I just talked about, which, I didn't have such a person. Steven Sinofsky once told me that a co-founder is not someone you find, but someone you have in your life already. And I didn't have that. And so it was really just me deciding that this was the best way to contribute to software for the next 5-10 years.
That's so great. So, like, um, when we started the new stack, we called it a 10-year project, and that helped to
Mm,
define things so much for us. We really then were able to really kind of focus on that. And
yep.
then it just, I think, to what you say, it's like it gives you a purpose. It gives you,
Yep.
you know, and well, one thing I would like to just kind of drill in on is this philosophy about programming. And I'm sure you thought a lot about this. Um, do you, um, do you know a guy named Matt Butcher? Do you know Matt?
Yeah.
Well,
We actually had him on our Console Dev Tools podcast a few months ago.
oh, great. Um, well, I really enjoy talking with Matt when I get the chance to see him. And we and he told me a little bit about his story about how he got involved in software. And if you ever get the chance, you should talk to him. But essentially, he was working for the Department of Public Works in Colorado Springs as a teenager. His dad helped him get the job, and there was a mix-up, and so they sent him down to the computer lab to learn HTML. And and so he learned HTML, helped them build their website. Then he got called up by the boss a few weeks later and said, "Hey, we got you mixed up with another person, but that person never took the job. So can you keep on working on HTML?" He's like, "Oh yeah,
Oh,
sure."
wow.
Yeah. So
That's great.
yeah, that great. I mean, I love those stories. But any case, but I talked to him about philosophy because he has a PhD, right? Um, in philosophy, and he wanted to study the philosophy of computer programming languages, essentially. So I'm curious. It just sparks me to think, like, what's your philosophy? Like, I think you spoke to it a little bit in the beginning of the conversation, but I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, my philosophy is actually I think there's a lot of philosophy in programming languages already, and we should be letting data and real use drive a lot more of programming tools and software development process. So I come from the world of programming languages research where I felt, I think there's actually a guy in our field who calls himself a theologian. Is that how you pronounce that
Yeah,
word?
yeah,
But there's a lot of comparisons of our field to religious wars because there's the types people and then there's the non-types people, and then then someone comes along and says, have you done any user studies? And the kind of user studies that people do in research are I think not appropriate for programming languages. Especially they're really complex tools with multi-year learning curves, all kinds of things like that. But that doesn't mean that we should be driven by what people think should be. And
Yeah.
so I've written a bunch of stuff on how developer experience should really be driving a lot of things. And it's not about the experience that the language creator necessarily believes everyone should have. Because one of my strong views is also the minute you get into the business of developer tools, you are not your user anymore. Because there's a real temptation and a real trap for compiler writers to optimize programming languages that they design basically for writing more compilers. I mean, there's a reason why, data types and data structures and traversing data structures is so nice in some of these newer languages that are coming out. It's because these are written by compiler writers where their use case is writing compilers. And so that's something that always really stuck with me, is that the minute you become a tool developer, or for me, I'm mostly in product now, I know I'm not building for myself. What I mostly program in is Python or Zapier, and I'm building for people who are not that. And so I think it's incredibly important to follow, the fundamentals of UX design and product when thinking about developer tools. So I think historically you had software is simple enough and tools were simple enough that you had some developers making tools for themselves on the side. But now developer tools are really this industry, their products. People are doing it full time, and people are designing languages full time. If you look at the people who made Go or the people who made Python, they've been doing that for over 1-2+ decades at this point. Yeah. They are so far removed from the needs of real developers in their day-to-day life because they have not been doing that, but they've been developing a language. And most people writing software these days, they're gluing together APIs, and they are they're maintaining legacy code in other ways. They're building for a different scale. Their users, they probably don't have the number of users that like Python has. And so I think it's really important for people to, I guess, in developing languages, to break away from philosophy, developing languages, developing tools, developing, and any products that involve software development, to break away from this I think very outdated thought that you're building for yourself. You're not anymore. And really think about what's the experience I want my user to have. My user is not me. And collect as much data on that as you can.
There's so much individuality in the programming languages, though, right? Like, it may be religious in terms of how you view, how you code, but that's reflection on those individuals. But the people who are creating the code are very individualistic themselves, but yet they have these religious beliefs, which then reflects upon, I mean, I don't want to get too philosophical, but a buddy of mine and I have been reading Nietzsche lately, and just to see what he actually had to say, and he talks a lot about this. He talks a lot about how essentially Christianity came from basically this belief that everything else was wrong in the past, and we're going to do it our way, right? And you must suffer. You must suffer greatly to really appreciate the full scope of your existence, right? So you must work and you must work tirelessly and forever if you want salvation, right? And so it seems like we're at a kind of a funny point right now, right? We're kind of coming to this juncture with programming languages and, the use of, how it's used, how technology is used by not just the individual, but by the people, but also there's still these looming beliefs.
Yeah, I think I would say the juncture is we're coming out of the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
Well, it's sort of like, medicine used to be you prayed. There's a set of things that doctors knew how to try.
Yeah.
And people fought a lot about, is it leeches or is it,
Right.
drinking brandy that's going to cure this person of consumption?
Right. Right.
I'm probably mixing up a lot of different Little House on the Prairie.
That's okay.
But and today, and yeah, so today there's a lot more data and research and things like that backing up modern medicine. And some of the shocking things is in the last decade. There's that guy Atul Gawande who collected even more data on what was actually effective practice for doctors. Doctors weren't washing their hands and patients were getting sicker and dying, all that stuff. And so there's data we can collect now. We can look back on many hundreds of years, decades of lessons. And I think we're entering that kind of zone with software development. So on the one hand, it's been around for more than a couple years at this point. The field of commercial software is older than probably most of the listeners of this podcast by now, and there's a lot of lessons, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of programmers out there. So back in the day, I love the stories of Bell Labs and RMS
Mm-hmm.
and those days, and you could
Yeah.
probably name every single really prolific programmer of that time if you really tried.
Yeah.
But today everyone is developing software, which
Right.
means there's also it's less individualistic in many ways. There's a lot more data. It looks completely different than it used to. And it's become a commercialized industry, for better or for worse, and software tools are products now. And so it's a very different world.
It's such a different world right now, and you see that so much in um, just the ease of programming. Like people who I really respect, who I've been talking to for a long time. Adrian Cockcroft, who was cloud architect at Netflix, not Netscape. Um, yeah, my Nets cleared up.
A
Um,
lot of nets out
there
there.
are a lot of nets out there. But he said that he was looking at some statistical information that he had, and so he started trying, to work it out in R, right? And he went to ChatGPT for some help, and he said he got it done so much faster. He was able to actually. But this gets into questions to me that I want to talk to you about, because this relates then directly to the questions of monitoring and observability, which
Mhm.
I mean, what's the and I know that you have an interest in open source projects such as eBPF, and so I'm just curious, like, a person of your background and such, what is it that you're looking for? And it must relate again to your 5 and 10 year goals and everything else. But on a sub level, on a deeper level, like, I'm curious about, what you're thinking about monitoring and observability kind of context of UPF, but also in this larger themes that we've been talking about for the past 10 minutes or so.
Yeah. So I got into monitoring and observability because one, because I realized that analyzing the software alone doesn't give you the full story. And two, because I felt that there are enough tools or enough people out there that are making tools to make it easier to make software. I have no doubt that we're going to just keep on enabling more and more software builders out there. I'm really excited with everything that's happening there. And, I feel like people have it under control. But what's not under control is understandability of software. So it's easier than ever before to build a software system. I judged a hackathon a few years ago where I think in a day, students were making stuff that was texting you about what was going on in your bank account, or, based on where you are geographically, playing different music. And it was all just, they could call some APIs and things would happen. But at the same time, it's still really hard to get over the hump of maintaining a software system that does that. So it's easier than ever to get that first thing working. But if you want to scale up a system like this, people fall into kind of the same tools that they had 10, 20 years ago, that are logs, metrics, traces in a pretty in a pretty 10 years ago, really modern and cutting edge way. But if software development has gone to this place where, what I'm doing these days is I'm going to Zapier, I'm asking like their, whatever layer they have on top of Chat GPT, like,
Mm.
I need to, make a doc every week and then send a Slack message that this doc is ready and here's what needs to go into the doc. And 10 minutes later, I have a whole system. You
Mm-hmm.
know, that's really advanced software development.
Very much so.
And there's no tools out there that really are like, okay, here's how you maintain the system. Here's how you like make sure this is still working. Here's what's going on in a system like this. And we're not at the layer of like the Chat GPT stuff yet. But what we want to do is we want to make it as easy for a junior developer walking into a job to understand the APIs they're working with, understand the relative performance, understand where their bottlenecks may be, with the same ease that they can just, get started with a new job and call a few APIs and be off to the races. And there's no solution right now that exists for that. And if we go back to the Zapier analogy, like I've never had any Zap over 6 Zaps really work that well that I've made. And I think it's because I don't understand what the heck is going on. So like they're too
Yeah.
slow or they just time out at some point, or the components don't work together. But like I think that and this is, I'm just making this analogy because like I said, I don't write low level code the way my team does anymore.
Right.
But someone who's calling APIs and their lambdas and doing all kinds of stuff, like I want them to be able to understand what's going on so they can scale that up, so that they can they can maintain that better, they can build on top of it, and they can their end-to-end software experience is more modern and not just the part of building new code.
So you want to be able to see a lot of information then, because, I mean, I don't know if that's the job of the low level coder or your job, but it seems like this is kind of gets you into the realm of data science in some respect.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so I think that a lot of software developers don't see themselves as being in the business of data science or, any kind of science, but they're, engineers are like, we build systems, we know all of our components. Here's a Swiss watch, it's really well
Yeah.
engineered. Here's a train, we know all the components. But software systems are more like ecosystems these days.
Yeah.
You have a lot of components. One analogy I like to make is software is like a rainforest, not like a planned garden, where you have all these organisms just coming in and out, being born, dying. It's really out of your control. And how you need to be engaging with software is more like a data scientist who's kind of poking around. What do I have here? What's the shape of the data that I have? What's going on? And the tools available today are pretty low level. It's like, here's a dump of your logs, have fun. Or even worse, you didn't log all the things you're supposed to log. Have fun, trying to figure out what to log for next time, but you're out of luck for this time. And so what I want to do is create a better experience for people here. So how do we automatically give people some idea of what's going on in their system, so they didn't have to have the forethought to log the right things? Or if they're working with a legacy system, they can't, it's not about forethought. How do you even like get your head around that? And so the approach we're taking is watching APIs in a black box way using BPF, which
Mm.
you mentioned, and really just treating this more like a data science meets UX problem.
Mm.
We're going to collect a bunch of data, we're going to help you make sense of it. We are not going to expect you to be an expert, and the question we're asking is, how can we empower non-experts to make sense of this? What would an expert do in this situation? Can we help replicate that? What would based, like, what are some common scenarios of data? Like those are the kinds of things that we're building into our product.
We're coming to the end of our discussion here. And one of the things I want to ask, though, in conclusion, then maybe you can just talk about how Akita and Postman are working together. Um, but I think the last question I have is, in these new environments that we have, in these ecosystems that we have, um, there is a logic in putting together, data so it comes out as in some natural language, and that might be code, for example.
Mhm, mhm.
And then the code, I'm sure people are implementing code right now into production that they generated, from an LLM, for example. How does that affect monitoring and observability? Because you're putting it so quickly into production.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think it makes monitoring and observability more important than ever before, because previously there was the assumption that you can only write code as quickly as you can understand it, or, at least it was still possible to maintain the illusion that people wrote their own systems. And so they should know how to monitor them. But if you're putting together systems and ChatGPT is helping you, and you're able to create systems just at an undeniably exponentially fast pace, way faster than you're able to log them or do anything there. It's a clear motivation for adding more automation to the monitoring and observability process. I also think it's a clear motivation that observability needs to be more than I'm going to trace every aspect of my system, because 10 of the 11 of those components maybe you didn't write. So what does it help you to trace everything? I think we need to zoom out. I think we need more automation, and we need to be thinking about monitoring and understanding our systems in with the same kind of innovation we're approaching creating these systems.
It seems like there's a lot of work to be done in this space. Just
Oh,
like,
definitely.
you know. So tell me a little bit about the two companies and why they're one. And by the way, we're owned by Insight Partners and Postman. Is Postman publicly traded?
Postman's still private.
Private. Okay, so we're part of the same Insight
Yep,
portfolio, of
same
course.
same same
Yeah.
investor.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for us, over the years, we really converged on it's all about APIs. APIs are what's making this all harder. APIs are the key to solving it, because the whole crux of our approach is watching API traffic at the network and then reconstructing the API endpoints, and APIs being the way we're communicating back to the developer what we saw. Like, we're not giving them TCP packets or, a dump of here's the bits we saw or something like that. Like, telling the developer we saw these API calls with these field values, that's at least understandable. And so for us, this higher level of abstraction for understanding systems and observing systems was really kept at the API level. And we kept on having users say, well, you watched my API traffic and now what? You told
Mm.
me some endpoints. What do I do with this information now? Can you integrate with something else or build me a bunch of other stuff so that I can take some actions on this? And so we kept on bumping up against Postman that way.
Mm.
Abhinav, the CEO of Postman, had actually reached out a couple of years ago and said, you all should think about becoming part of us, because I think we're really aligned. And at the time I said, well, we need to find ourselves first. We need to figure out if that's actually true. Even if we were to become part of you, I don't think it's time yet, because we need to figure out what's right to build for our users. And maybe it's something around APIs and maybe it's something else. And over the last couple of years, it just only solidified our belief in APIs being the key to raising the level of abstraction, improving the ease of use of monitoring and observability in these complex systems. Postman has continued moving in a similar direction of, we still agree on, we're not building for Facebook or Amazon, but every developer that's not them out there in the world. And we were
Great.
really aligned on wanting to build an accessible, democratic monitoring and observability tool that was useful to not just the principal engineer on a software team, but anyone who could walk in and make sense of their system.
Mm. That's great stuff. Gene, thank you so much. Really enjoyed this conversation. And I really kind of love your perspective and your, from your philosophy about programming languages to really being there to serve people, really. I think that's so important now. It's just, and it's gratifying, isn't it? I mean, there's a gratification that comes with that. And I think I really sense that.
Yeah, no, thank you for noticing. Yeah, for me, it's always been about how do we help developers build software that's reliable,
Yeah.
trustworthy, does the thing it's supposed to do. And that's also really just about how do we help developers better serve their users. And, I think that's the mandate we all have as developer tools creators.
Yeah, there's such joy and and being grateful, to have that ability to help people in that way. I just think it's good stuff. So, Gene, thank
Yeah,
you so
thank
much.
you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. This is really fun.
If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, you can always subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're on all the major social media platforms. You can always find us at thenewstack.io We hope to see you soon.